Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Wednesday evening live stream offered here live from Empty Cloud Monastery. Whether you are watching this live or you are watching this after it's been recorded. And there are also those of us here in the room, the most live you can get. So I hope that you're all doing well and that your practice is progressing, that your mind is peaceful, and that your life is conducive to a happy heart. And we have greetings and Anjali from Lydia in Los Angeles, and also Sean and Brian and Ryan. And then there might be other people joining in. So wherever you're joining in from, I hope that you have some time to do some meditation practice with us. This is scheduled as a guided meditation, so we'll be doing exactly that, a meditation which is guided. Before we do that, we did not get to finish the very end of the sutta in much detail, and I said that we would cover it. And so I'll use that as a time, just a very brief, not going into detail of this sutta, because you can see that in the previous videos. You can, if you go into the channel and you click on the live section, you'll see a part 1 and a part 2 for the shorter discourse on emptiness, Majjhima Nikaya 121. And so you can go onto the live YouTube channel section and see those videos there. The first one is a little bit more theoretical, and the second one is a little bit more practical. They kind of course, it's all mixes together. But this time we will just briefly review what is emptiness meditation, taking the time to just take a look at the last part of the sutta, and then we will go in and go ahead and practice it. And so at this time, I'll render homage to the Buddha, and then we can go ahead and get started. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So emptiness meditation. The Buddha is on record in the suttas for saying that he often abides in meditation on emptiness. And we saw that that was how the shorter discourse on emptiness begins, with Ananda asking him about that. And the Buddha then goes on to give a description of how one could abide in emptiness, right? And so this guided meditation will be a kind of sample of one way that you might try to follow the instructions of this sutta, applying them to your life, right? So as I mentioned, you can learn about the details of the sutta in the previous videos. But what the principle of the emptiness meditation was, as we discussed, is a kind of combined form of calming and insight practice, so samatha and vipassana, kind of mixing and intermingling those to use reflections on emptiness to calm the mind, but then using reflections on emptiness to then notice the disturbances which are in the mind. So we're using emptiness here in a kind of practical sense, noticing, is the mind empty or full of disturbances? That's actually what the Buddha is talking about. He's talking about the emptiness of disturbances, the emptiness of the Pali word dadatha, meaning something maybe like you could call it stress or disturbance. And so the Buddha was talking about how when we notice and we appreciate that actually our environment, our mind, our experience is empty of certain disturbances, then we can be peaceful and we can notice a kind of unified perception around that, right? Noticing, for example, the room and noticing that it's empty of elephants and horses, for example, right? And for some people that might be sad if you like elephants and horses, but you notice it's more peaceful and there's not a bunch of animals in there. And so, but then you notice that it is still full though, right? It is still full of many things. And so then you might find more peace. And actually we do this anytime we meditate, right? We notice, oh, my mind has certain thoughts, but you appreciate the peace that your mind is, just in the moment, just being in the present moment. And then, you notice maybe empty of past and future. To what extent it's empty of that, you find some peace. And then to what extent your mind is empty of thoughts, you might find more peace. And to what extent your mind is empty of more diverse perceptions, right? And so you can kind of go on like that. So that's one aspect of this, is finding peace within emptiness, but also using emptiness to find the lack of peace, right? And then the other aspect that we talked about last time was how this is really the early Buddhist counterpart to what it later became a popular form of Buddhism in certain Chinese and Japanese and Tibetan strands of Buddhism, right? So when we talk about meditation methods or meditation approaches like silent illumination or just sitting type of meditation, shikantaza, or mahamudra or dzogchen, kind of certain forms or certain practices within those traditions, then this is really the early Buddhist counterpart to that. And you might not be thinking it is very similar, but we talked a bit last time how actually this practice is not one of, and it leads to a certain point, which I'll mention, is that this practice that the Buddha is describing here is actually one of what I would call unhooking the mind, or the way that I talked about it last time, which I think is good, is allowing the mind to rest in a more natural state, right? So like actually our mind is, for example, naturally, our mind has thoughts, but it's also aware of those thoughts, right? And the awareness is more natural. It's actually more easeful. Like you have to put forth more effort to produce a thought than to just be aware. So your mind actually has a more base level of awareness, which is more base level than the thoughts. And you can actually do that in many different ways. So when we do emptiness meditation, we are doing the kind of unraveling process on the mind. So the mind is complicated in our normal state, but actually at the same time, it actually has a more base level, relaxed state, right? But there's many of those actually, many of them, and the Buddha is going through them, right? And so that's what we'll do. So when we do this emptiness meditation, you actually don't need to, as it starts out, right? He starts out being in a stilt longhouse outside of the city in ancient India. Well, you don't need to imagine being in a stilt longhouse to do this meditation, right? So there are imaginative ways to do this meditation, where you imagine being in a more empty environment. Like I have taught in the past, and I practiced, in the past, imagining being in an empty field, and I find that helpful. But actually, once you step away from the environment, so like whether you're in a field or whether you're in a basement or whether you are in a stilt longhouse, actually it doesn't matter once you go past that step. So that the emptiness meditation, past the step of what environment you're in, past the kind of first step, you could say, is actually not one of what we would maybe call constructing, creating, fabricating, concocting experience. So we're unraveling that. So to make sense of this, so this is how, when I give the guided meditation, this is important. So what we're doing is we are trying to recognize a more relaxed state of the mind, like a more subtle state. I should say a more supple, a more easeful, natural state, right? So like naturally right now, your mind is functioning, natural. And it's similar with space, right? Like space is less effortful than the objects of space, right? I hope that intuitively that kind of makes sense, right? Like objects they have more diversity. They require more effort to produce, right? You have to shape them, and they have differences, and they have different degrees of kind of subtlety. But space is even more subtle than the most subtle physical object, right? So physical objects are more, you could say they're more complex than space, right? Like in order to make a physical object, it requires more effort. They take up, and they're less soothing. They're less simple. So they're less natural, right? Like space is more natural than physical objects. At least on the level of just our mind reflecting. We can find more naturalness in space. So like you can just abide in the perception of space, and the space is more easeful than trying to abide in the perception of a physical object. Now, it might not be easeful because our mind is used to concocting and constructing things, right? So our mind has a habit tendency of doing things, like of creating things, of creating experiences, of creating identities, of creating thoughts, of creating emotions, right? And so this is called sankhara, right? So of constructing, creating, fabricating, making, and doing, and so on. So sometimes in meditation, we can fight fire with fire, so to speak. And you can actually actively create a more peaceful experience, right? So for example, you might actively focus your mind on your breath. So you actually are focusing your mind, and you might actually actively create certain perceptions around the breath. You might actively kind of create, almost just as we might imagine being in a field, right? You create that space with your mind. So you create a whole kind of imagination with your mind, and you abide in that. You might actually do the same with the breath, right? You might kind of create a whole atmosphere around the breath, and then you abide in that. So emptiness meditation is, we're doing the opposite of that. So we're trying to unravel the tendency of the mind to construct and create, and we're trying to let it abide in a less created state, like a less created one, right? So more like what, in Taoist texts, you have a famous image of uncarved wood, right? The sage is like wood which is uncarved, meaning that when we construct and concoct a kind of identity or a spirit experience, it's more limited than if we just are in a natural state. And so emptiness meditation, what are we doing? We are trying to recognize that. So you should not be, ideally, trying to create something new, but actually just recognizing what's already there and noticing that it's emptier of what was before it, right? So like when I talked about before, you notice that the room has space in it. You're not creating space, right? It's not the same as saying imagine an elephant. Right? That's where you actually imagine something. You actually create something in your mind. When I say notice that space is pervading the room, you're not creating anything. It's already there. You're just recognizing it. You're just recognizing that there was a more natural, although the objects might change, the space is the same. So it's more natural. It's more kind of persistent in that way, right? It's more base level. So you're just recognizing that. And then it goes on from there. So the steps of this emptiness meditation, as I mentioned last time, in the kind of East Asian, Tibetan traditions, they are set within a context of what they would call kind of sudden or instantaneous realization, sudden instantaneous tranquility and insight kind of together. But realistically, it's not going to be sudden, right? Even in those schools, like realistically, it's not sudden. Actually, you're taught how to do a practice, and then you're going to be practicing it gradually, right? And so this is in the suttas, this is the Buddha's example of like how you act. He gives a list of what are the gradual stages that you can expect as you unhook your mind. So as you focus on characteristics, and then you notice that you're creating and concocting your mind around those characteristics, so then you unhook the mind from those characteristics into a more natural state, a more effortless state. Then there are certain stages along the way, and the Buddha is pointing to what are those stages. So what are the stages? Because it's important to recognize that during a guided meditation, you actually won't be able to really experience the stages very in detail. It's more like a pointer, and then on your own, you'll have to practice this meditation. So like, for example, if you're hearing my voice, right, or if I'm speaking and so on, it's definitely not possible for you to be to be in a signless state or something like that, because you're perceiving the sounds and you're understanding them and you're thinking about them and so on. So a guided meditation is actually just to point your mind in the direction, just to give you a sense of like, can you notice that? Can you find that in your experience? Can we find that, right? Can we notice that? So take this guided meditation, please, as a pointer, like pointing to you to investigate in your experience. Like, can you notice that space is more natural? Can you notice that you don't have to construct it? It's already there. But then the next step, that actually space is constructed from the perspective of consciousness and so on, moving down the levels, right? So the idea here being that what is the most natural, like as you empty your mind, as you make your mind less constructed, less concocted, as you make your mind less artificial, basically, right? Then you're going to find the natural state of your mind, like the base level of your mind. What is the real state of your mind? And what is it, what does it turn out to be? It turns out that there isn't one, right? It turns out that it's empty, like that there isn't a base state of your mind. Any state of mind is fabricated, no matter how big or small. But you're relinquishing the fabrication process, you're relinquishing the construction process of your mind to realize, like, deeper and deeper levels. You try to realize how that level of your mind has been constructed and how there is something more simple, how you let go of that. So now let's go briefly to the sutta to talk about the last step. So as we mentioned, the sutta does seem to have an editing error, and that's been discussed before. But the Buddha, he talks about how if we take away the editing error and we just look at what is the sutta probably originally like, and we look at the parallels and so on, then basically someone goes from the perception of nothingness and then they transition to the signless. And so he says they focus on the oneness dependent on the signless immersion of the heart. And their mind leaps forth, gains confidence, settles down, and becomes decided in that signless immersion of the heart. But then they realize that even the signless immersion of heart is produced by choices and intentions. The word being, it's abhisankato and abhisanchetiyato. So it is sankato. Abhisankato means it's been produced by choices. It's produced by construction, intentional construction of the mind. It's been intentionally put together, meaning that even that state, even the signless state, if you attain it, even that is not a naturally abiding state of your mind. Like it's not the natural, it's not the eternal state of your mind. You could think about it like that. Like if your mind was completely set free, would it be abiding in that state? The answer is no. It's actually a temporary constructive experience. And it's abhisanchetiyato. It means it's been created through intentions. So, but then they understand whatever is produced by choices and intentions, so whatever is constructed, whatever is created by karma, whatever the mind has latched onto and created, that is impermanent and liable to cessation. And when they know and see like that, their mind is freed from the defilements of sensuality, the defilement of the desire to be reborn, and the defilement of ignorance. And when they're freed, they know they're freed. They understand that their rebirth has ended, that they have completed the spiritual journey, that they have done what they had to do, and that they have nothing further for this place. And they understand that there is no stress due to the defilements of sensuality there, no stress due to the defilement of the desire to be reborn, or stress due to the defilement of ignorance. But there is only that modicum of stress, namely that related to the 6 sense fields dependent on that body and conditioned by life. And they understand that their field of perception is empty of the defilements, but it's not empty of the 6 sense fields dependent on the body and life. And so they regard it as empty of what is not there, but as to what remains, they understand that it is present. That's where emptiness manifests in them, genuine, undistorted, pure, and supreme. And the Buddha says at the end, that whatever ascetics and Brahmins enter and remain in the pure, ultimate, supreme emptiness, whether in the past, future, or present, all of them enter and remain in that same pure, ultimate, supreme emptiness, meaning the emptiness of the defilements, right? And then at the end, he says that the monks should train that they will practice that emptiness. So that's what we'll be doing. We'll try our best to kind of get a hint at this. Of course, as I mentioned, it's going to be more pointing in the direction. So the supreme emptiness is emptiness, the mind empty of the defilements, right? But as the Buddha says, it's not empty of the body, right? Because they're still alive. So they still have the senses. So there is still that modicum of stress, the Buddha says, meaning that their mind is still, it's experiencing, it's still perceiving a fabricated state, right? It's still perceiving, it's still working. The mind is still there. So to that extent, it's still constructed, but their mind is empty of the defilements, which is, the Buddha says, that's the supreme emptiness. And why? He's not just being clever. It's because before, our mind is already, our mind is, because we are not arhants, I assume that none of us are, right? That our mind is always grabbing onto something. Like it's not possible for us to just, like our mind is always in some kind of held together state, basically. Like our craving is always present. Ignorance is always present. Even if someone does temporarily suppress it, it's not, it'll come back. So, that means that our mind will never actually be completely free. Like it will always have some kind of base level state that we can't let go of, right? It's like kind of like we're held in place by whatever our craving is at. So like if you crave for sensual pleasures, it's not possible for you to experience a state that's above those. If you crave for, some other higher spiritual state, it's not possible for you to experience a state above that. So whatever extent we have defilements, that's the limit of our experience. Like the defilements limit our mind. They create, as the Buddha says, characteristics. And if there's no defilements, then you won't have a base level of your mind. Your mind will be completely empty, meaning that it'll be able to completely let go of everything. But we can't let go of everything. So our mind is always full to some extent. Whatever extent we have defilements, to that extent our mind is full at the end of the day. So no matter what the temporary meditation experiences you might have are, your mind will always have some kind of base level based on where your defilements are. And so the Buddha is saying, well, you can only actually have a completely empty mind, like a mind that is totally formless, you could say, right? Like a mind that has totally no ultimate level when you have no defilements. So that's the Buddha, kind of talking about what would be the experience of someone who's awakened. Well, although their mind would still be functioning, although they would still be perceiving their senses, and there would still be that level of non-emptiness, right? Their mind would still be working. It would still be full of certain perceptions. However, their mind would be completely unattached, completely empty of any kind of clinging, completely empty of any kind of fixation, right? So their mind would be free to cease and so on. They would have no problem entering any kind of meditation or dying, and it would be no problem for them because their mind has no fixed state. So for the rest of us, we have to practice this meditation to see, like, how much can I let go? What base level of my mind can I get to? And so we start with just our bodies, and then we try to let go as much as we can. So those are a few thoughts. And so now we can go ahead and we'll look at this, or we'll, try to practice a kind of beginning idea of this type of meditation. And so the stages I'm going to go through, so that you have an idea, we are going to start with our bodies and our current environment. So I will not be having you imagine, I'll just have you do a natural emptiness kind of meditation so that you can do this wherever you are. So you're just noticing, you're not going to be, to the best extent possible, not going to be constructing or creating any kind of images. You're actually going to be trying to relinquish images. And I should say, actually, I'll say it when we get there. So you're actually going to be trying to relinquish any kind of fixation on images, resting in a more natural state of your mind, a less constructed state of your mind. And so we'll start with your environment, or we'll start just with your body and with your environment. And just noticing, like, your current state, just sitting down and the state of your body and your mind, and appreciating whatever emptiness is there. Okay. And then we will notice that you're part of your environment, right? And you actually don't need to fixate on the concept of yourself sitting here. Actually, you can just allow the environment itself. So it's as if you're not even sitting there, just the room is sitting, like just the environment is sitting, like trying to remove a sense of separation between me and my environment, right? That is less, because we construct a sense of separation. So actually, more naturally, the mind doesn't have a sense of separation. Like, we create a sense of, like, I'm here, the environment's there, but actually there is no boundary. The environment doesn't recognize a boundary. So it's not like we're in the room. There's just the room, and it includes us, but there's actually not a boundary from the perspective of the environment itself. So you can actually, you can actually perceive that in your meditation. Like, you can perceive as if there's just the environment sitting all as one unit, right? So that will be the next step that we'll try to just point to, to see if you can get a hint of that. And then after that, you'll notice, though, that the environment, you'll still be perceiving things like sounds, things like the objects in the environment, whether it's nature or inside. And, you'll still be perceiving the different sensations of your body. So there is still a sense of diversity within the environment. So this is the equivalent of when the Buddha has Ananda go to the wilderness. So he has him first sitting in the room, recognizing his body in the room with the people. And then he has him just imagining just the unified perception of just the wilderness, no people in there, just the environment. So you don't have to do the wilderness, just whatever your environment is, allow your mind to rest in that state, or natural state. But then notice that actually within the environment, there is a diversity, and there are, though, different experiences of the elements. So you might notice, like, experience of solidity, you might notice your breath, you might notice some kind of sense of the different objects in the room. But we'll notice that all the objects, all the things in the room, and including your body, they're all just an example of solidity, right? All objects have the same characteristic of solidity of earth. So we'll just try to notice, like, instead of imagining an environment sitting with many different things in it as one unified thing, what about just the unified part of the environment, which is just the earth element? So it'll be similar to the environment, but you're trying to let go of the mind which fixates on diversity. So rather than fixating on your mind, thinking, like, perceiving a kind of the whole room, you'll just perceive it as kind of one, less diverse. And then we'll go to space. So then noticing that all of that is occurring within space. So your environment and your body and the elements, even the simple elements, occur within space. And you try to relinquish the mind, which you try to rest in the more natural state, noticing that if there are physical objects, then they're occurring within space already. So space is already there. It's actually more simple. It's more background. So you try to rest into the more background, the more simple state, relinquishing your fixation on the characteristics of the earth element, just noticing the space, just resting in the space. Again, though, there won't be, ideally without trying not to build a separation between yourself and the space, because you're supposed to try to cultivate dropping that already at the level of the environment. So this just space without a boundary, just space without a sense of internal, external. Then we'll notice that the perception of space is actually occurring within your mind. Like the perception of space is actually something within your awareness. So whether the space is limited or not limited, whether you perceive earth element or space, all of that is actually the more background level. There's a more base level of the mind, which is just awareness, right? So you try to see, can you notice that? Can you tune into that in your meditation? Can you notice that whether you're perceiving space or not, the space is occurring within awareness. So the awareness is more background. And then we'll notice that the awareness itself is occurring within like a kind of a realm. It's still, the awareness itself is occurring not within physical space, but within existence, basically, right? So like it's possible for awareness to arise and cease, right? So even the perception of awareness is something that arises and ceases under certain conditions. So just like within space, different objects can come into existence, and just like within awareness, space can come into existence. Within nothingness, awareness can come into existence, right? So there's actually below awareness, there's actually like a level of nothingness. Otherwise, awareness couldn't be there. So it's almost like objects occur within space, and space occurs within awareness, but awareness also has to occur within some kind of space, right? Like there is some kind of base level, there's some kind of a lower level thing, otherwise awareness couldn't appear, right? So awareness occurs within nothingness. And then we try to notice, can we stop the mind from fixating on any characteristic, even the concept of nothingness? Can we try to abide in a state of silencelessness? Recognizing that, again, not trying to force it, but because we realistically, we're not going to be able to, right, at this time. So we have to practice and so on. And during a guided meditation, it's not going to be possible. But you just try to see, like, to what extent can you drop your mind from fixating on any characteristic whatsoever? Even the concept of, like, no characteristic. Even the concept of emptiness. Like, can you just... So this would be trying to rest your mind in the most natural state possible. Like your mind literally not picking up anything, but still aware. So not, falling asleep, but not aware of anything. Like just aware of the absence of. So this is the ultimate emptiness, because before we notice, oh, the room is empty of this, empty of that, empty of this, empty of that. Can you notice just emptiness of everything? Like not actually perceiving something else, but just perceiving absence, just perceiving the absence of characteristics, right? So we'll try to point to that. Can you notice that possibility in your mind? And that would be the signless. So that's what probably, some meditation traditions would talk about as maybe some other vocabulary. But it seems that when the Buddha talks about the signless immersion of the heart, he's talking about someone who attains a state of awareness where basically they are perceiving the absence of everything, but they're still aware, right? And you can kind of get a sense of this if you've ever practiced some kind of like bare awareness or sense restraint, where you see things, but you try not to fixate on them, right? Like you try to just let them be as they are. And actually one example of this is that if you take something in your room or whatever, and if you look at it, so look at something visual, and notice that if you stare at it long enough, can you actually make it disappear from your field of vision? And have you ever had that experience? Like if you stare at something, you can actually almost, it's possible for some people to just blur it out, but like their eyes are still awake. They're not blind. They're still seeing, but like what they were looking at is no longer present to them. So you can actually, if you look at something long enough and you try to almost like look through it, like pretend that it's translucent, letting go of it characteristics, you might actually stop perceiving it. And just imagine that you did that with literally everything. So it's like the whole world is just like clear water, crystal water. So what would you be perceiving at that time? Well, you wouldn't be perceiving anything. You'd just be perceiving the absence of characteristics. So that's what the Buddha is trying to get you to do with the signless. So once you get to the, at least imagining, right, at least trying to conceive of what would it be to perceive nothingness, then see, like, what would it be if you kind of tried to see through that? Like if you kind of tried to look at it and see through it as if it was transparent, as if it was crystal clear, so that your mind was literally just like clear water. It had no signs in it whatsoever, but it was still functioning. So at that point, that's the end of the experiences that you can go, right? Your mind can't get more basic than that because there's no characteristic. There's really no other feature that could appear. It's the most simple it can possibly get. So, but the Buddha says that that's still fabricated, right? That's still a conditioned experience of the mind. So that's the progression that we'll go through. And so we'll probably go about maybe 45 minutes to, probably about 45 minutes or so. And so I hope that gives you a basic sense of where we're going, so that you have a sense of like, what is the idea? Otherwise, because this is kind of a complicated, I know that for some people, you might be thinking, I just want to notice my breath. But try this out and see how it goes. And it shouldn't be too forceful, just like natural. Can you let your mind just naturally let go of something more coarse? Okay, so we will find a comfortable sitting position. And it's good, you want to have your body in a position which will not cause so much disturbance, because almost in the beginning, we're going to be trying to not fixate on our bodies so much. So if possible, please try to just allow your body to be relaxed, and it's okay, even if you need to recline or you need to be in a position which is not traditional, though we recommend sitting in a traditional position. That's okay, because as long as you're awake, as long as your mind is alert and you're in a respectful, upright position, then that's okay. So we will just try to make our bodies comfortable but upright and alert so that we don't fall asleep. And we can rest our hands just naturally. And for the beginning of this meditation, I will actually recommend that you keep your eyes partially open, just looking down about 45 degrees in a relaxed manner. So just not fixating on the characteristics of what you're seeing, but just allowing the kind of light, just the bare experience of what your eyes naturally pick up. Can you just let that kind of rest on the mind? And this way we will be able to perceive our environments more clearly. And we'll begin just taking a few deep breaths, filling up with air, bringing a sense of clarity and mindfulness to our minds. And exhaling, allowing our bodies to relax. Exhaling out the tension and stress you might be carrying in your body. And you can allow your breath to return to its natural, abiding rhythm. You don't need to focus on the breathing. Just simply notice the presence of your body, whether that includes your breathing or not. Can you just be aware, naturally aware of your body sitting? You can notice that actually without trying, your mind is aware of your body sitting. It's natural for your mind to be aware of your body. It requires effort for us to imagine our minds in some other place. But if our minds become a little bit more still, we naturally are aware of our bodies. And please just allow your body to feel however it feels. Just with a sense of clear awareness, keeping the mind aware of this aspect of the body. The sense of ease, the sense of joy just to be doing this practice here. And noticing that there is also a sense of safety and a sense of lightness that comes when you recognize that it's okay, however your body feels, whatever the state of your mind is, that so long as you are aware of it, you're cultivating a more still mind. So you notice this sense of freedom that actually your body can feel however it feels. You can just simply be aware. Don't need to force. Noticing the lightness that comes when the mind is not needing to do anything, just resting, just naturally resting in awareness of the body. We just have to step back from the more coarse activities, directing our minds outwards. And so when you relinquish the thoughts of the past, when you give your mind to relinquish thoughts of the future, and when you give your mind permission not to be off imagining and discoursing in the present, but actually naturally your mind is just aware of sitting. And so this is not a practice of focusing, it's simply sitting here. Simply sitting because it's more natural for the mind to be aware of sitting. And please notice that this is empty. Please notice to what extent is your mind empty of running to the past, the future, or imagination. Please appreciate the peace, the lack of disturbance in that emptiness. And please notice the emptiness of external disturbances. You may notice that your room is relatively quiet, or you may notice that it's not as loud as it could be. it's more quiet than it could in a louder room. You may notice that it's relatively peaceful. It doesn't have violence. It doesn't have dangerous fires and tornadoes and floods. Notice to what extent your environment, just sitting here, is empty of external disturbances. And appreciate the peace of that emptiness. Noticing the absence, the more natural, easeful absence, which is already there. You just must notice it. And so you are noticing the emptiness of whatever seclusion you might have. You're noticing the peace, the lack of disturbance and stress. Notice to this extent, it's empty here of internal disturbances. To this extent, it's empty here of external disturbances. But there is this non-emptiness. This is not empty. My field of perception is aware of my body sitting in the environment. And can you notice the difference between those two perceptions? Noticing that when you focus on the emptiness, you notice the lack of disturbance and stress. And when you focus on the non-emptiness, you come to notice the presence of some kind of more coarse disturbance. Allowing your mind to abide wherever you can, to whatever extent you can, just aware of the sitting, aware that here there is emptiness and also a non-emptiness. And now please, based off of your expression, your experience, your noticing of what is it like to notice the absence of disturbance. Based off of your experience, noticing the emptiness. Can you unhook your awareness? Can you relax your mind? Can you release your mind to a more base, ground level, natural state, becoming aware just of your environment? Can you relinquish the distinction between your body sitting and the entirety of your field of perception, the entirety of your environment? Using your experience of emptiness to see through the more surface level experience of your body sitting. Can you see through to the more base, ground level experience of your entire environment resting here? Just one environment, just one room, one space, whether indoors or outdoors. Just one environment. Making your mind more expansive. Your mind more vast. Noticing that it's more constricting, it's more forced to limit the mind to the size of the body. And actually your mind is aware of the entirety of your environment. And whenever you notice your mind trying to pick up and fixate on the body sitting, remember that you don't need to force, you don't need to construct. You just need to see through, unhook, release, relax, open up your mind to a more naturally basic, naturally expansive awareness of your environment. Just seeing if you can allow that to happen. Noticing that when you force it, it only makes it worse. Any sensations, pains, tensions in your body do not create a sense of distinctness. They are just like the objects in your room. They're impersonal. Try to allow the mind to rest in just the environment, resting here. We're not bothered by the different objects in the environment. The environment is naturally there. The environment is also not bothered by any pains or sensations in the body. It's just another piece of this whole environment. The environment does not recognize a sense of separateness. It's just one unified whole, composed of many parts. And so you see if you can remove the more limiting, constricted self, placing ourself in the center of the environment. Can we shift out to just the environment itself? The whole environment of which we're only one part. And notice that in order to do that, you only need to relinquish, to let go, to stop constructing the effortful sense of distinction and self in your mind. Notice that naturally, more easefully, less effortfully, your mind is aware of your environment already. You're simply trying to notice that. And now, friends, please notice that your room, your space, your environment is just a larger part of the entire universe, the entire environment. Any sense of walls or borders, any sense of boundaries that we build around this room and that one, from the perspective of the elements, from the perspective of the universe, the entirety of the environment which exists, there is no boundary, there is no center. And just as you try to notice the placing of our body in the center of the environment and displacing that, can you also try to notice how we place our environment in the center of the world when actually the entirety of the world, the entirety of the universe is resting, of which only our environment is a part. Seeing if you can break down the constructed and fabricated barriers in your mind. Can you open your mind up to a centerless entirety of the whole universe, the whole physical universe, the whole environment? Noticing that your mind is already a part of that. try to get a felt sense of the entirety of the physical world, a felt sense of how we create a feeling of separation and draw borders in the mind. And actually, more naturally, more easily, there's just the raw experience. The entirety of the physical universe has no borders in and of itself. Can you notice that boundless, more easeful and less effortful quality of one boundless whole environment? And can you see through the more limited, constricted notion of a bounded, fixed environment? Whenever any forcing or tension arises, try to allow it to melt and sink, release away into the more natural, open possibility of your mind, of simply the entire universe, resting without borders. And to whatever extent you can, tap into that perception. Please notice such a perception is empty, empty of so many disturbances, so much stress and concoction, empty of the sense of a separate body and self, empty of the sense of a separate room and a border, empty of the sense of boundaries and limitations. But that perception is also not empty. It's not empty of the perception of the universe, not empty of the notion of different physical objects and rooms. It's not empty of the notion of physicality itself. The diversity of the things of the world, the diversity of the universe. And see if you can notice that there is this balance here, to whatever extent you are trying to notice that perception, that there is a balance between some lack of disturbance and some presence. And reflecting like that, can you unhook your mind? Can you see through the diversity of the physical things of the world, of any environment? There are jungles, there are oceans, cities and towns, stars and moons, planets. Can you see through that and notice that all physical things, all physical objects of the world, they all share that simple quality of being physical objects, no matter their shape, their size, their color, their location. The entirety of the universe is unified by that one characteristic of physicality, some degree of solidity or shape. Can you notice just one field of solidity without making distinctions between separate objects? Can you notice that it requires more effort on the part of the mind to interpret and create a distinction between separate objects? Can you notice a more easeful resting place of the mind that simply notices one characteristic of solidity? And notice that whatever object you were experiencing, you are already noticing solidity. You simply add on other perceptions as well. You already have a notion of size and shape, of form. You simply concoct and fabricate it to be more specific than that. So can you unhook your mind? Can you release your mind from that process? Can you perceive the more easeful, the more natural, the more basic, simple perception of solidity, extending boundlessly? And can you notice that such a perception is empty of the disturbances of various different objects, empty of the effortful distinction between different things, but that it is not empty, not empty of the perception of solidity. And can you notice that balance there? Can you recognize the emptiness, the peace, the absence? So empty. empty of all the different things, but full of solidity. And now, friends, I invite you to notice that any perception of solidity, any perception you might have or notice, or try to appreciate of boundless, universal, unified solidity. Below that, beneath that, more naturally, less effortfully than that, you're also perceiving, to some extent or other, boundless space. Any sense of boundless solidity must occur within boundless space. Any physical things must occur within space, must take up space, must be pervaded and surrounded by a more naturally present space, a more potential, open sense of space. Can you see through any perception of boundless solidity? Can you empty out any concoction and fabrication of solidity? And can you rest in a more natural, basic state of simple space? And whenever your mind starts to pick up characteristics of solidity, can you allow them to dissolve into the naturally present space that they take up? Can you allow your mind to step back to the already base level space? Noticing that in order to perceive any solidity, you must also already be perceiving space. Space is undisturbed. Space is light. It's always there whenever there is solidity. Can you appreciate the emptiness of space? The emptiness of any resistance. Space is empty of any materiality, any solidity, any separation or barrier. Can you appreciate empty space? Anytime your mind might want to pick up a more coarse physical distinction, can you notice the peace, lack of disturbances, if you are able to perceive just empty space? Can you dissolve, unhook the mind from the more coarse, more effortful perception of solidity? And please notice that although space is so empty, so peaceful, space also has a non-emptiness. It has a fullness. Can you notice the fullness there, the presence of space? Can you notice the non-emptiness compared to the emptiness? Notice to whatever extent your field of perception is empty of any disturbances which may have come before. But also notice that your field of perception is not empty. It is full of space, full of the perception of space. Can you balance that perception? And using whatever sense of balance you have there, whatever sense of emptiness and fullness, can you then empty out the fullness one more level, one more degree, one degree further? Can you notice that your field of perception is empty of space, but more basic, more natural? Already there is your perception itself, your awareness itself. You are aware of space. Are you aware of boundless space? And if so, then your awareness is also boundless. Any awareness of space occurs within awareness. It occurs as an aspect of awareness. It occurs above awareness. But naturally and easily, awareness is reflecting. In your mind, it reflects the perception of space. Can you notice that which knows space? Can you melt the perception of space into the simple perception of knowing? Recognizing that your mind is knowing. There is the knowing. Not focusing on the objects of what you know, but noticing that you know. Can you notice the awareness itself? And can you drop any sense of boundary? Can you stay with a sense of boundless pure awareness. And to whatever extent you are aware of awareness, aware of the knowing, please notice that to that extent, your field of awareness is empty, empty even of space, empty of reflecting distinct objects, distinct experiences. Can you notice that even boundless space would occur within awareness? Can you notice the more easeful, more natural, less disturbing and stressful level of awareness? Can you notice any emptiness? What is gone? But can you notice that there is that presence, there is the presence? To what extent is there the presence of the perception of awareness? Can you notice that the perception of awareness still has something present, but that it also has an emptiness? And can you balance that? Can you be aware of the emptiness of disturbance, but the fullness, the presence of awareness? And can you use whatever balance you have there to emphasize the emptiness? Can you dissolve awareness? Can you notice that beneath awareness, more basic than awareness, awareness must occur, must exist? Below it would be nothing. Below it would be non-existence. What if your awareness were to disappear? What if your awareness were to vanish, just as anything else before might have vanished? Can you notice that beneath existence, for anything which exists, must occur within a field of non-existence, a field of nothingness? Anything which exists, in order for it to be there, there must have not been something Something must not have existed for existence to be full of something. Can you notice the nothingness that lies behind any awareness? The nothingness that lies behind any existence? Can you notice the emptiness which lies behind any fullness? Can you abide in a perception of nothingness? And whenever your mind becomes aware of its awareness, can you dissolve that awareness? Can you notice that it too must arise and cease? Rise from where? Cease to where? Where does awareness come from? And where does it go? Can you notice nothingness before awareness? Nothingness after awareness? Can you notice just nothingness? Nothingness which lies behind any existence. And to whatever extent you perceive nothingness, can you notice that nothingness is empty? Empty of even awareness, knowing itself, empty of concepts about existence. It's empty of everything that came before. Can you notice the more peaceful, more basic, more fundamental level, the peace of nothingness, empty of everything else? Nothing is empty of everything. Can you notice that you are, to some extent, whatever extent you are, still perceiving nothingness? You are still inclining the mind to notice some quality of nothingness. Can you notice any presence, any non-emptiness? Can you balance a perception of emptiness of everything else, but a presence of nothingness. And can you let the mind drop all characteristics? Can you drop the mind below perceiving nothingness? Can you see through everything, dissolve everything? Can you let your mind rest in its most base, most unhooked, most simple and free state possible? Anytime you notice your mind becoming aware of any sign, any concept, any feature, can you dissolve it into absence? Can you unhook it into signlessness? Remembering that any emptiness should require even less effort than before, not more effort. And friends, please allow your mind to return to any perception or noticing of nothingness. Noticing any fullness. And please allow it to return to knowing awareness, knowing the knowing. And please invite your mind to notice space, boundless space. And please invite your mind to notice solidity, pure solidity occupying space. And please invite your mind to notice the various objects and distinctions of the entire universe filling boundless space. All the physical universe. And please invite your mind to notice your current room, your current environment. And please invite your mind to notice your body sitting. And when you're ready, you can bring your palms together near your heart and say 3 times, Sadhu, Sadhu, Sadhu. And please have a good night.